The poor Apache widow tried to steal the sheriff's horse, but the sheriff didn't harm her instead. The widow lived on the edge of a small frontier town, in a worn-out shelter made from old wood, cloth, and scraps that kind people had once given her. The wind passed easily through the cracks, and at night the cold crept in, making sleep difficult. She wrapped her thin blanket tightly around herself and her child, trying to keep what little warmth they had. Every morning she woke before the sun, not because she wanted to, but because worry never allowed her to rest for long. Her husband had died many months earlier, and since then, life had changed in ways she never imagined. He had been her strength, her guide, and her protector. Without him, the world felt much larger and much harder. She now had to make every decision alone. She had to find food, water, and small work whenever possible, all while caring for her child, who had been weak and sick for some time. The child's small coughs at night were a constant reminder that time was not on her side. The town was not welcoming to her. Many people looked at her with suspicion or fear, not because of anything she had done, but because of who she was and where she came from. Some avoided her completely. Others spoke in low voices when she passed by. A few were kind, offering leftover bread or a little water, but kindness was rare and never enough to last long. Each day became a quiet fight just to survive. She tried to earn food by doing small tasks. Sometimes she cleaned stables, swept porches, or carried water for shop owners. The pay was small, and often it was not even money, but a piece of bread or a bowl of thin soup. She accepted whatever she could get. Pride had no place in her life anymore. Hunger was stronger than pride. The look in her child's tired eyes hurt her more than any harsh word from the townspeople. As days passed, food became harder to find. The little she earned was never enough. The child's sickness made it worse, because the child needed more care and better food to grow strong again. The widow felt trapped. She could not leave the town on foot with a sick child and no supplies. She knew that some of her relatives lived far away, in a place where she might find safety and support. But the distance was too great to travel without help. Every night she lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling of her shelter, listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep, horses shifting in their stables, dogs barking far away, and the soft wind moving through dry grass. In those quiet moments, her thoughts became heavy. She asked herself how much longer she could continue like this. She asked herself how long her child could last without better care. The idea that began to form in her mind scared her. At first, she pushed it away. She told herself it was wrong. She told herself she would find another way. But as hunger grew and hope became smaller, the idea returned again and again. The sheriff owned a strong, healthy horse. Everyone in town knew it. That horse was fast and well cared for. With that horse, she could travel far in a short time. With that horse, she could reach her relatives and ask for help. With that horse, she might save her child's life. She did not think of the horse as something to steal for money. She thought of it as a way out, a path to survival. Still, her heart felt heavy with guilt just thinking about it. She had been raised to respect what belonged to others. Taking something that was not hers felt like crossing a line she never wanted to cross. But desperation has a way of changing how a person thinks. When every door feels closed, even a locked door begins to look like the only way forward. During the day she walked through the town, her eyes lowered, her thoughts busy. She noticed how people moved freely, how they laughed, how they carried bags of food or led healthy horses. It felt like she was watching a different world, one she no longer belonged to. She wondered if anyone truly saw her struggle, or if they only saw her as a problem they wished would disappear. One afternoon, She sat outside her shelter, holding her child close. The child's face was pale, and their breathing was shallow. The widow touched the child's forehead and felt the warmth. Fear tightened her chest. She whispered soft words, trying to comfort both the child and herself. In that moment, she knew that waiting was no longer an option. Doing nothing was no longer safe. She needed to act, even if the choice was painful. As evening came, the sky turned orange and then deep blue. The town grew quieter. Shops closed, and people went inside their homes. The widow prepared a small meal from what little she had left. It was barely enough for one person, but she gave most of it to her child. She pretended she was not hungry, though her stomach ached. Watching her child eat, even a little, gave her a small sense of peace. After the child fell asleep, she sat in the darkness, thinking. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her shawl tighter around herself. The plan in her mind felt both simple and dangerous. She would go to the stable late at night. She would try to take the horse quietly. She would leave town before morning, heading toward her relatives. She told herself she would return the horse someday if she could. She told herself this was not for greed, but for survival. Fear walked beside her thoughts. What if she was caught? What if she was punished? What if the sheriff was angry and made an example of her? The town already did not trust her. Being caught would only make things worse. Yet another voice inside her whispered that losing everything was better than watching her child grow weaker with no hope. She remembered her husband's words from long ago about courage and responsibility. She wondered what he would think of her choice. Would he understand? Would he forgive her for breaking a rule to protect their child? Tears filled her eyes as she thought of him. She missed his strength, his calm voice, his steady presence. Now she had to be strong for both of them. The night grew darker. The moon rose, casting pale light over the quiet town. The widow stood slowly, careful not to wake her child. She checked the small bundle she had prepared: a little water, a piece of cloth, and a few personal items. It was not much, but it was all she had. She kissed her child's forehead gently and whispered that everything would be all right, even though she was not sure if it would be. Each step she took away from her shelter felt heavy. Her heart beat fast and her ears strained to catch every sound. The town felt different at night. Shadows seemed deeper. Every small noise felt louder. She stayed close to the edges of buildings, moving carefully, trying not to be seen. Her breath came in short, quiet breaths. As she got closer to the sheriff's stable, her fear grew stronger. She could smell the hay and hear the soft sounds of horses shifting inside. The place felt both hopeful and terrifying. That horse represented her only real chance, but also her greatest risk. She stopped for a moment, closing her eyes, steadying herself. She reminded herself why she was there. She reminded herself of her child's weak breathing and tired eyes. In her heart, she was not trying to be a thief. She was trying to be a mother who refused to give up. She was trying to survive in a world that had not been kind to her. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but she pushed forward, step by step, driven by love, fear, and a small, fragile hope. This was the moment where her life could change forever. She did not know what would happen next. She only knew that doing nothing was no longer possible. In the quiet of that frontier night, with the stable just ahead, the poor widow stood at the edge of a choice that would test her courage, her heart, and her future. The widow waited in the shadows near the stable, her body still, her breathing slow and careful. She listened to every sound, trying to understand if anyone was nearby. The night felt very quiet, but that kind of quiet made her even more nervous. When everything is silent, even a small noise can feel loud and dangerous. She held her shawl close around her shoulders and took a few deep breaths to calm her shaking hands. She could hear the soft movements of the horses inside. One horse stamped its hoof gently. Another made a low, tired sound as it shifted its weight. The smell of hay and animals filled the air. It reminded her of better times, when her husband was alive and they traveled together. Back then, a horse meant freedom and work and movement. Now it meant hope mixed with fear. She waited for a long moment, watching the stable door. A small lantern burned inside, casting weak light through the cracks in the wood. She did not want to rush. Rushing could make mistakes. She had learned in hard ways that mistakes could cost a person everything. So she stood still, listening, watching, letting the night pass slowly. Her thoughts raced inside her mind. What if someone came out of a nearby building? What if a dog started barking? What if the horse made a loud sound? Each question made her heart beat faster. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the strong rhythm there. She whispered a short prayer in her mind, asking for strength and protection for herself and her child. Finally, when the light inside the stable dimmed, she knew it was time. She stepped forward carefully, placing her feet slowly on the ground to avoid making noise. The dirt felt cool under her thin shoes. She reached the stable door and touched the rough wood. For a second, she froze. This was the last moment to turn back. This was the last moment to choose fear over action. But then she thought of her child again. She thought of the small, weak body and the tired eyes. That memory pushed her forward. She slowly opened the door just enough to slip inside. The smell of hay became stronger. The horses lifted their heads, but they did not make much noise. They seemed calm, as if they sensed her quiet and gentle movements. Inside it was darker, but her eyes slowly adjusted. She could see the shapes of the stalls and the strong wooden beams. She moved from stall to stall, looking for the sheriff's horse. She had seen it before in the daytime. It was larger and better cared for than most. Its coat was clean and its eyes were alert and strong. She hoped it would be calm now. As she walked deeper into the stable, her heart felt like it was trying to escape her chest. Every small sound made her stop and listen. A piece of hay falling. A horse breathing out slowly, her own soft footsteps. Each sound felt too loud in her ears. She reminded herself to move slowly, to be patient. Then she saw the horse. Even in the low light, she recognized it. It stood quietly, its head low, resting. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at it. The horse looked strong, healthy, and ready for travel. Tears filled her eyes. This animal was her chance. This animal was also not hers. The weight of that truth pressed on her heart. She walked closer, speaking softly in a calm, low voice. She did not want to scare the horse. She reached out her hand slowly, letting the horse smell her. The horse lifted its head and looked at her. Its eyes were dark and calm. It did not move away. That small moment gave her courage. Her hands shook as she reached for the rope. She tried to untie it quietly, her fingers moving carefully. The knot felt tight. She worked slowly, afraid that pulling too hard would make noise. Time felt strange in that moment. Every second felt long, stretched thin by fear and focus. As she worked, her mind kept jumping to thoughts of being caught. She imagined someone opening the door suddenly. She imagined a loud voice calling out. She imagined strong hands grabbing her arm. The fear made her stomach tight, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Turning back now would mean returning to the same hunger, the same sickness, the same slow suffering. Finally, the knot loosened. The rope slipped free into her hand. For a second, she just held it, not moving. She had done it. She had taken the first real step. Her heart beat so hard she thought the horse might hear it. She gently led the horse forward. The horse moved slowly, as if understanding that quiet was important. She guided it toward the stable door. Step by careful step, the wood creaked softly under the horse's weight. The sound felt loud to her, even though it was small. She paused, holding her breath, listening for any reaction from outside. Nothing happened. The night remained quiet. She continued forward. The stable door was just ahead. She could see the faint moonlight through the opening. Freedom was close. Her hands tightened on the rope. Her mind began to race with plans. She would walk the horse out of town quietly. She would wait until they were far enough away before riding. She would head straight toward her relatives. In her mind, she could almost see her child safe and smiling again. Then, just as she reached the doorway, she heard footsteps outside. The sound was slow and steady. Not running, not rushed, just calm steps moving closer. Her body froze. Her heart dropped into her stomach. For a moment she could not move at all. The horse lifted its head and shifted slightly, sensing her fear. She wanted to run. She wanted to let go of the rope and disappear into the darkness. But she thought of her child again. Running without the horse would mean returning to the same hopeless life, so she stayed where she was, her hands tight on the rope, her body stiff with fear. The footsteps grew closer. A shadow moved across the ground outside the stable. She could see the shape of a person near the door. Her breathing became shallow. She felt dizzy. She knew that in just a few seconds, everything would change. She lowered her head slightly, not in defeat, but in tired acceptance. If this was the end of her plan, then at least she had tried. At least she had not given up without a fight. She prepared herself for harsh words, for anger, for judgment. The town had never been kind to her. Why would this moment be any different? The shadow stopped at the doorway. For a long, heavy second, no one spoke. The widow stood there holding the sheriff's horse, caught between fear and hope, knowing that her risky decision had brought her to this exact moment. Whatever happened next, her life would never be the same. The shadow at the stable door became clearer as the person stepped closer. The widow's heart felt like it was beating in her ears. She could barely hear anything else. Her hands tightened around the rope, and for a moment she thought she might drop it because they were shaking so badly. The horse shifted its weight, sensing the tension, but it stayed calm. A lantern light slowly appeared, lifting the darkness from the doorway. The warm yellow glow touched the wooden floor and the lower part of the horse's legs. Then the light moved higher, and the widow saw the shape of a man standing there. She did not need to look twice to know who it was. It was the sheriff. He stood quietly holding the lantern in one hand. His face was serious, but not angry. His eyes moved from the widow to the horse and then back to her. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The silence felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on her chest. The widow's first thought was to speak, but her voice felt stuck in her throat. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She felt small and tired and very afraid. In her mind, she prepared herself for harsh words, for being told she was wrong, for being pushed away like she had been so many times before. The sheriff finally broke the silence. His voice was calm and low. He did not shout. He did not raise his voice. He simply asked, "Why are you here so late?" The simple question made her eyes fill with tears. Something about the way he spoke, not angry, not cruel, made her feel like she could no longer hold everything inside. Her shoulders shook slightly. She looked down at the ground, unable to meet his eyes at first. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Her voice was weak, almost a whisper. "I didn't want to cause trouble." The sheriff did not move closer, but he did not step back either. He waited. His quiet patience made it harder for her to stay silent. Slowly, broken by emotion, her words began to come out. She told him about her husband. She told him how he had died and how everything had changed after that. She told him about the long days of looking for work and the short nights of worry. She told him about her child, weak and sick, needing more care than she could give with what little she had. As she spoke, her voice grew steadier, but her eyes stayed wet with tears. She explained how she had relatives far away, people who might help her if only she could reach them. She explained how walking was impossible with a sick child and no supplies. She explained how the horse had seemed like her only chance. "I didn't want to steal," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know what else to do." For a long time, the sheriff said nothing. He listened. He did not interrupt her. He did not look away. He simply stood there, holding the lantern, letting her speak. The widow felt something she had not felt in a long time, the feeling of being heard. The stable felt very quiet again after she finished. The horses shifted softly, and the lantern flame moved slightly with the night air. The sheriff's face changed just a little. The hard lines of duty softened. His eyes showed something different now. Not judgment, not anger, something closer to understanding. He took a small step forward, still keeping a respectful distance. "You should not take what belongs to someone else," he said gently. "But I can see that you are not here for bad reasons." The widow nodded quickly. "I know it's wrong," she said.
"I know, but my child is all I have."
I was afraid of losing everything. Her hands loosened slightly on the rope.
The strength she had used to hold herself together was fading. The fear, the stress, the long months of struggle all seemed to rush to the surface at once. She felt weak, like she might fall if she did not hold on to something. The sheriff noticed. He moved a little closer, not to threaten, but to make sure she did not collapse. "You look very tired," he said quietly. She gave a small, sad smile. "I am tired," she admitted. "Tired in my body, tired in my heart." Those words seemed to touch something inside him. He looked at her more closely now, not as someone breaking a rule, but as a person who had been carrying too much for too long.
"You're not a bad person," he said after a moment.
"You're a desperate one." The widow lowered her head again. Hearing those words made fresh tears fall. No one in town had said anything kind to her in a long time. Most people only saw her as a problem or a burden. Hearing someone speak to her with respect felt strange and almost painful, because she had forgotten what it felt like. The sheriff looked at the horse, then back at her. He seemed to be thinking carefully. His duty told him one thing. His heart told him another. The widow could see that he was not a cruel man. She could also see that he was a man used to making hard choices. "What about your child?" he asked. "She is resting in our shelter," the widow said. "She is very weak. I was going to bring her after I got the horse." The sheriff's jaw tightened slightly. He nodded slowly. "A sick child should not be left without help," he said. For a moment, the widow feared he was about to tell her to leave, to go back, to face her problems alone. Her heart sank. She prepared herself for disappointment, but instead, he surprised her. "Come," he said softly. Let's talk more. You should not be out here alone in the dark like this." She looked up, confused.
You're not going to? Her voice faded, unable to finish the question.
"I'm not here to harm you," he said. "I'm here to understand what's happening." Those words felt almost unreal to her. She had expected anger. She had expected punishment. Instead, she was being offered something much more powerful: understanding. Slowly, carefully, she stepped back from the doorway, still holding the rope, but no longer trying to leave. The sheriff stood beside her now, not blocking her, but standing with her. It was a small change, but it meant everything. For the first time that night, she felt like she was not facing the world alone. The lantern light showed the lines on the sheriff's face, signs of years of hard work and responsibility. He was a man who had seen many kinds of trouble, but in that moment, he was not acting only as a lawman. He was acting as a human being. "You did not come here because you wanted to cause trouble," he said. "You came because you felt you had no other choice." The widow nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "That's the truth." The night around them felt different now, still quiet, still dark, but no longer filled only with fear. There was something else there, too, a small, careful sense of hope. She did not know what the sheriff would decide next. She did not know if her problems were over or just beginning. But one thing was clear. For the first time in a very long time, someone in that town was looking at her not as a stranger to be pushed away, but as a mother, a widow, and a person who was trying to survive. And that simple change made all the difference. The sheriff stood quietly for a moment after listening to the widow's story. The lantern light moved softly as his hand shifted, and the small flame made gentle shadows on the stable walls. The widow waited, her heart still beating fast, unsure of what his final decision would be. Every second felt heavy, as if time itself was holding its breath. Finally, the sheriff spoke again, his voice steady and thoughtful. "You've been carrying more than one person should have to carry alone," he said. "Losing your husband, caring for a sick child, and trying to survive in a town that has not been kind to you, that is not easy for anyone." The widow looked at him, surprised. She was used to people blaming her for her situation, as if her suffering was her own fault. Hearing someone speak with understanding felt strange and almost painful, because it reminded her of how long she had gone without it. "I didn't want to break any rules," she said quietly. "I just wanted my child to live." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said. "Oh, I got to. And I also believe that sometimes people make bad choices when they feel trapped. That doesn't make them bad people." He took a few steps toward the horse and gently placed his hand on its neck. The horse remained calm, breathing slowly. The sheriff looked back at the widow. "This horse is important to my work," he said, "but a child's life is more important than a piece of property." Those words made the widow's breath catch in her chest. She had not expected that. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not only from fear. They were from relief, from a sudden feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was not completely alone in the world. The sheriff reached into a small bag near the stable wall and pulled out a piece of bread and a small water container. He handed them to her. "Here," he said. "You should eat and drink. You look like you haven't had enough in a long time." The widow hesitated. Taking help felt difficult for her. She had been forced to rely on herself for so long that accepting kindness felt strange. But her hands were weak, and her body needed strength. She accepted the food with a quiet thank you. She ate slowly, trying not to seem desperate, but the bread tasted better than anything she had eaten in days. As she ate, the sheriff leaned against a wooden post and thought quietly. He was not only thinking as a lawman, he was thinking as someone who had lived long enough to understand that life was not always fair, and that rules alone could not fix every problem. "You said you have relatives far away," he said. "People who can help you?" "Yes," she replied. "They live many days' travel from here. They are kind people. If I can reach them, they will not turn me away." The sheriff nodded again. "Traveling alone with a sick child is dangerous," he said. "Even with a horse." The widow lowered her eyes. "I know," she said. "But staying here feels even more dangerous for my child." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would change everything. "I won't let you take the horse in secret," he said. "But I also won't turn you away with nothing." The widow looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said carefully, "that if you are going to travel, you should do it the right way, with supplies, with food, with some protection from the dangers on the road." He turned and walked toward the stable door, then looked back at her. "Come with me," he said. "We'll talk to a few people in town." The widow's heart began to race again, but this time for a different reason. "They won't want to help me," she said softly. "Most of them don't trust me." "Some won't," the sheriff admitted.
"But some will listen, and they will listen because I ask them to."
They walked together out of the stable and into the quiet street. The moonlight shone on the empty road. The town looked peaceful, as if nothing painful ever happened there. The widow held her shawl tight around herself, feeling small beside the sheriff, but also feeling safer than she had in a long time. They stopped first at a small store. The owner was surprised to see the sheriff so late, but he opened the door. The sheriff explained that a widow and her sick child needed help to travel safely. The store owner hesitated at first, then looked at the widow's tired face and thin frame. Slowly, his expression softened. He gave them some dried food and a small bag of grain. Next, they went to another home, then another. Not everyone was kind. Some people shook their heads. Some said they had nothing to spare. Some looked at the widow with doubt. Each time the widow felt a small sting of shame and sadness. But each time the sheriff stood firm. He did not argue loudly. He simply explained, calmly and clearly, that helping someone in need was the right thing to do. And slowly, little by little, they gathered more supplies. A blanket, a small pot, a few pieces of clean cloth, enough to make a difference. The widow watched all of this in quiet disbelief. She had expected rejection. She had expected to be pushed away. Instead, she was being helped in small but real ways. It did not fix everything, but it gave her something she had almost lost: hope. When they returned to the stable, the sheriff set the supplies down carefully. "This is not charity to make you feel small," he said. "This is help to give you a chance." The widow placed her hand over her heart. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "No one has done this for me in a long time." "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "Just take care of your child, that's thanks enough." He then did something that surprised her even more. He untied the horse himself and placed the rope gently in her hand. "You can use the horse to travel," he said. "I will tell people that I gave you permission. That way, no one will chase you or accuse you of stealing." The widow's hands trembled as she held the rope. "But what about you?" she asked. "Won't you get in trouble?" The sheriff gave a small, calm smile. "I can handle that," he said. "Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing." Tears ran freely down the widow's face now. She tried to speak, but her words were lost in emotion. She had never expected kindness like this from someone in authority. For so long, power had only meant fear to her. Now, for the first time, it meant protection. "I will never forget this," she said finally, "as long as I live." The sheriff nodded. "Just promise me one thing," he said. "What is it?" she asked. "Promise me you will build a better life for your child," he said. "That you won't give up, no matter how hard it gets." "I promise," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. The night air felt lighter somehow. The stable, which had once felt like a place of fear, now felt like a place where her life had changed. The widow stood there with the supplies, the horse, and a heart full of mixed emotions, fear of the road ahead, but also deep gratitude and a growing sense of strength. What had started as a desperate act had become something else entirely. It had become a moment of mercy, of human kindness, and of a choice that would not only change her life, but also quietly change the hearts of those who witnessed it. And though the widow did not yet know it, the sheriff's decision that night would be remembered for a long time, not as a moment of broken rules, but as a moment where compassion proved stronger than judgment. The first light of morning was just beginning to touch the sky when the widow prepared to leave the town. The air was cool, and a soft gray color rested over the streets. Most people were still asleep, unaware of the quiet change that was about to take place. The widow stood near the stable with the horse, the supplies packed as best as she could. Her hands moved carefully, checking each small bundle, making sure nothing was forgotten. She walked back to her shelter one last time to get her child. The child was still weak, but when the widow gently woke her, the child opened tired eyes and gave a small, trusting smile. That smile gave the widow more strength than any food or blanket ever could. She wrapped the child warmly and held her close. When they returned to the stable, the sheriff was already there, waiting. He had a calm look on his face, but there was also a quiet seriousness in his eyes. He helped the widow lift the child onto the horse carefully, making sure she was safe and comfortable. Then he helped the widow up as well, arranging the supplies so they would not fall. The widow looked down at him from the horse, her heart full. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," she said. "You don't have to repay me," the sheriff replied. "Just go. Get your child the help she needs. That's enough." The widow nodded, her eyes shining with tears. She placed one hand on her heart and bowed her head slightly in respect. "Your kindness will live in my heart forever," she said. The sheriff stepped back and gave a small wave of his hand. "Safe travels," he said. "May the road be kind to you." With that, the widow gently guided the horse forward. The sound of hooves on the dirt road was soft but steady. Each step carried her farther away from the town that had been filled with struggle and closer to a place of possible safety. As they traveled, the widow stayed alert, watching the land around her. The road was long and not always easy. Some paths were rough, and some days were hot, but having the horse made a great difference. What would have taken many painful days on foot now took far less time. The widow felt tired, but she also felt hopeful in a way she had not felt in a very long time. At night, she would stop and make small camps. She would give her child water and food, wrapping her warmly before sleeping. She would sit quietly, looking up at the stars, thinking about the sheriff and the kindness he had shown. In those quiet moments, she promised herself again and again that she would not waste this chance. The child slowly began to show small signs of improvement. Her breathing became a little stronger. Her eyes looked a little brighter. These small changes felt like miracles to the widow. Every small smile, every calm breath felt like proof that the hard choice she had made was leading them towards something better. After many days of travel, They finally reached the place where her relatives lived. When they arrived, tired and dusty, the widow's heart pounded with nervous hope. She did not know exactly how they would be received, even though she believed they were kind people. As soon as her relatives saw her, they rushed forward in surprise. When they saw the child's condition, their faces filled with concern. They did not ask many questions at first. They simply helped. They brought clean water, warm food, and a safe place to rest. The widow felt tears of relief as she watched her child being cared for. In the days that followed, the child received better food and gentle care. Slowly, step by step, her strength returned. She began to laugh again. She began to play small games. The widow watched this with a heart full of gratitude. Each laugh felt like a gift she had almost lost. The widow worked hard to help her relatives in return. She cleaned, cooked, and helped in any way she could. She did not want to be a burden. She wanted to build a new life with dignity and effort. Her relatives respected her strength and her determination. They saw not a woman who had failed, but a woman who had survived and protected her child. Far away, back in the small frontier town, people slowly began to hear the story. They heard how the sheriff had helped a poor widow instead of punishing her. At first, some people shook their heads. They said rules were rules. They said kindness made people weak. But others began to think differently. They remembered the widow's tired face. They remembered the sick child. They began to understand that not every problem could be solved with strict judgment. The sheriff's choice became a quiet lesson for the town. Some people began to look at strangers with a little more patience. Some began to offer help instead of turning away. The sheriff himself went on with his work, but something had changed inside him too. He knew he had done the right thing, even if not everyone agreed. He had chosen compassion over cold rules, and deep in his heart, he felt at peace with that choice. From time to time, the sheriff wondered how the widow and her child were doing. He hoped they were safe. He hoped the child was growing strong. He did not expect thanks. He did not expect to ever see them again. But he believed that kindness had a way of traveling farther than any horse. Many months later, a small message reached the town through travelers. They spoke of a widow and her child living safely with family, the child healthy and full of life. The people who heard this felt something warm in their hearts. The story became something people shared, especially with their children. They told it not as a story of stealing, but as a story of mercy, a story of a mother's courage, a story of a lawman who chose to see a human being instead of just a broken rule. For the widow, life was still not perfect. There were still hard days. There were still worries. But she was no longer alone. She had support. She had hope. And most importantly, she had her child's laughter filling the air again. Sometimes at night, she would sit quietly and think back to that dark stable and the moment she was caught. She would remember how afraid she had been. She would remember how close she had come to losing everything. And she would remember how one person's kindness had changed the path of her life. In her heart, she carried deep respect for the sheriff. She taught her child about him as someone who showed mercy and understanding. She taught her that strength was not only in strictness, but also in compassion. The road that began with desperation ended with new beginnings. A poor widow who once felt invisible found a place where she belonged. A sick child who once struggled to breathe grew into a healthier, happier life. And a small town learned, little by little, that sometimes the greatest law is not written on paper, but written in the human heart. And so, what began as a moment of fear became a story of hope, a reminder that even in the hardest times, One kind choice can change many lives.